Namaste, welcome to India in Real Life. Today we'll be talking about Russian oil. If you look at global headlines post February of 2022, you would arrive at a conclusion where India is solely responsible for the Russia Ukraine war. Or rather, come to a conclusion where India would be partly blamed for the innocent deaths of Ukrainians in Russia Ukraine war. How did we arrive here? How did India started being blamed for whatever is transpiring in Ukraine? If you look closely, the headlines would also have this part attached to it. India still continues to import Russian oil despite sanctions from the US. India funds Putin's war by buying its oil. India doesn't care about Western sanctions or about Ukrainians. Pretty much, this was the gist of the articles that were being written by your international media. Your international media would include New York Times, Washington Post, Washington Journal, the Telegraph. BBC was at the forefront of this race, and this was pretty much the norm till recently. Even today, they continue to do so. But the tone and the demeanor of those things have gone down after passing of 1.5 year. But the sentiment still remains the same, that India is funding Russia. Is there any merit to that claim? Is there any merit to that accusation? It's not a claim, it's a straight up accusation being thrown against India. The answer is no. To be pretty honest, the answer is no. If you are a student of geopolitics, there is only one rule. There is no interest except your own interests. I don't think I'm doing a good job by explaining it, but at the end of the day, you have to look after your own self-interest, and every country operates on that principle. Coming back to that headlines, coming back to that accusations that India is funding Russia's war in Ukraine, and India is solely responsible to whatever that is transpiring in the world right now, particularly in that region. But when you look at the facts, and when you look at the global scenario at the time and now, when you look at the realistic aspects of the trade, that accusation doesn't stand a chance. So I won't bore you with the data, but I'll give you the gist of the data. Till 2021, Russia was supplying only up to 3% of Indian oil needs. It did not even crack 5%. If you look at the historical data for the last 3 or 4 years, I'm not going beyond 4 years, Russia Russia's supply to India's energy needs was less than 3%, barely broke 3%. This definitely did change post February of 2022, and I'll tell you the reason also. So, who were the suppliers of India before February of 2022? The top suppliers of India before 2022 were Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and other Persian countries, US, Nigeria, and few other countries, including Venezuela. Something transpired in between also. Iran is no longer the top supplier. Iraq occupies its spot, followed by Saudi Arabia, followed by US and some other countries. Why did Iran go out of that list? If you remember, in 2015, I- I- Iran signed the Iran nuclear deal with United States and all the Jacopa agreement. If you know what it is the Iran nuclear deal. So in 2018, Donald Trump comes in and says the deal is unfair. It restricts. It is not in the interest of America, or it is not interest of the world. So we are pulling out of that deal. So the Iran nuclear deal allowed for Iran to export its oil to other countries, and the major beneficiaries, or one of the major beneficiaries of that deal, was India. India was importing a large amount of oil from Iran. Iran, as that at that time, stood the number one supplier of India's oil needs. So in 2018, when Donald Trump pulled out and reimposed sanctions on Iran, India had no other option but to stop importing oil from Iran. India and Iran, along with many other countries, including EU countries, European Union countries, tried to overcome those sanctions, circumnavigate those sanctions to import Iran oil. But as the time went on, it became harder and harder and harder for Iran to access the funds that it is getting paid for exporting that oil. And it became hard for countries to accept Iran oil and pay Iran for its exports. So I'm talking only about India. So India stopped importing oil from Iran. So for a country that is entirely dependent on imports for its energy security needs, India imports 85% of its energy needs from other countries. Sometimes it goes up to 90% also. So our oil import bill, or our percentage of oil import, is 85%. Our needs are met by 85% import of oil from other countries. So 2018, Trump comes, says Iran nuclear deal is kaput. India, you no longer can import Iran's oil. So India was essentially left without a major chunk of its energy security basket being missed. Iran was the top supplier, and now you don't have that supplier. So how do you fill it? Thankfully, we navigated those troubled water by requesting other Persian countries to increase their quantity of oil allocation to India, and we started diversifying our energy needs to various other means and methods. Iran left. That spot was occupied by Iraq, followed by Saudi Arabia, followed by US. We also increased our imports from US because of the lack of our major supplier Iran. So that went on. Now our import, 85% of that import is being filled by 20 to 25 countries based on time and month requirement. But the top 5 to 10 still supply 90% to 80 to 90% of that, our import basket, our requirements, our import energy requirements. Mind you, all this is taking place at a time where when the economy of the globe is starting to crumble. Then we know what hit, then we know where we are economically. Not I'm not talking about India alone, I'm talking about the global economy as a whole. Comes Russia's invasion of Ukraine on 24th February of 2022. When Russia started its special operations in Ukraine, the West imposed sanctions immediately. If you don't know how the world operates, the first knee-jerk reaction of every conflict is imposition of sanctions, because we forgot long back what would be the uh, I don't think global order works on long term effects of sanctions, so nobody cares about it. We'll deal with those situations when they arrive. So the knee jerk reaction from at least the West is, if something doesn't go according to their plan, sanctions. This times sanctions hurt not the Western countries immediately, the countries that were dependent on two things: countries that were dependent on food, their food security on Russia and Ukraine, countries that were dependent on Russia for their energy security needs. US was sitting comfortably. US was still and will be one of the important importers of Russian oil. It will be like that for some time. The biggest importer of Russian oil was European Union. They had multiple pipelines supplying oil, natural gas, and petroleum to European Union. Most of those pipelines run through, or at least the major ones run through Ukraine. So sanctions started getting kicked in. An interesting thing happened. So countries that were heavily dependent on Russian oil could no longer import oil from Russia. So naturally, what they did, They started going to Persian countries and said, we cannot import Russian oil. Now you supply. Remember, Russia was servicing a lot of countries. That meant Persian countries were free to trade with African countries, other Asian countries, and they were a critical part of energy security of those countries that were those countries. Meaning, Persian countries were a critical lifeline for these countries. The quantity doesn't matter, but the supply of oil from these Persian countries to these African nations and these Asian nations was critical to their energy security nets. So the West naturally goes to these Persian countries and said, we have a big gap in our supply chain, you fill it. The Persian countries had two options. One, they could increase their production and supply or fill that gap. Two, not increase their production, but cut the supply of oil to other countries and supply that balance to Western countries. Imagine which choice they went with. Because if you increase the production, the global price of oil will go down. It is not beneficial to those countries. So they started negotiating with other countries, or rather, the implication was that we'll cut our supply of oil to the existing countries, and we'll supply that balance to Western countries so that they can fill their gaps. Now, India is dependent on countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other countries for our fuel. So, what should we do? Tough spot, right? Then Russia comes up with this idea that we are going to sell oil at discount price. If the barrel of the oil international price of a barrel of oil is $100, we'll sell it at 70 or $80, $20 discount. Two countries that responded. I'll be very see. I'm not an expert in this. All I am. This is my way of understanding the thing. I'm saying what I'm trying to say is, this is my point of view. I'm not trying to say this is the right thing, this is the wrong thing, this is actually what has transpired. I'm saying this is what I understand from what I understand from. So two countries responded enthusiastically, countries like China and India. China because of its own interests, India because of its critical energy interests. Remember, we were grappling with, and we are still grappling with, inflation and our energy insecurities. There is no other word for it. Your entire country runs on imported oil. So if you lose that supply, as I said, we don't stand a chance. Things will be hard for us. Things will be very hard for us. We don't even have the strategic reserves that America has. Our strategic reserves runs us for 40 days, if I'm not wrong. 60 days if we stretch it. Beyond that, our strategic reserves run dry. It's not like how Biden dipped into natural strategic reserves and filled in the gap. We cannot do that because we don't have that much of reserves either. We are trying to address that issue, but as things like this would take a long time, our issue also will take some time to arrive at that point. So our reserves would serve us for 40 days. After that, everything has to stop, which would be catastrophic to our own economy. Two things were happening. There is a direct assault on global supply chain of oil because Western countries were desperate to fill their gap left by the Russians. That didn't mean that they completely stopped importing oil from Russia. They were still importing oil from Russia. They were still importing uh, gas from Russia. All those pipelines that I talked about were filled with oil that was being sent to European Union countries, then from there to US. But they were they were expediting their process of acquiring oil from other sources, which directly hurts existing customers. In this case, countries like African countries, Asian countries, India. So when Russia comes out with a good deal, obviously countries jumped in. Not only India, The reason we talk about two countries because of the sheer size and the quantity and the volume that we bought. There were n number of African nations, there were n number of South America's countries that were purchasing Russian oil to an extent. For the South America's, okay, no, African and Asian nations were not part of the Western sanctions, were still purchasing oil, including some Scandinavian countries, if I'm not wrong. So we jumped at that offer. Kudos to our external affairs minister and our petroleum minister. They successfully, in my opinion, defended India's self interest in the face of the onslaught of news articles, the onslaught of criticism from old leaders, from within internal. There was a lot of criticism from inside India. I don't know who these people are or how. I'm not going to say the word how. Um, okay, I'm going to leave it because it's not worth my time. So there was a lot of criticism from within the country also, because these people are too intelligent to understand how energy security needs are met in our country and how dependent we are on our imports of oil from other countries. So there was a lot of onslaught on India, and during this time came those articles. So I'll show you something. Please bear with me, because I feel, rather than showing it, so since 2019, in 2019, Russian percentage of oil supply to India was 3%. In 2020 it was the same. In 2021 it fell to 2%. In 2022 it was 16%. In 2023 currently it stands around 35%, and it is decreasing right now. Look at it. As I said, our Russian import percentage did not crack 3%. Rather, on the opposite trend, it was coming down. We were not importing that much of oil or gas from Russia. But Western sanctions did change how much we were importing. Not only that, uh, on one hand, these sanctions forced us to purchase Russian oil. On the other hand, Russia was offering that discount. The third and the most important from Indian perspective, that few people may fail to understand, is we didn't want Russia to be completely dependent on China. I think it since Nehru time, our entire gambit has been to prevent Russia and China becoming close. I think our entire foreign policy in that direction has been in that regard. Kudos to the successive government after Nehru, they still maintained it. I think that is one policy that we all agree that we cannot allow China and Russia to become close. As Velina G says, the dragon bear modus operandi or modus vivendi is the most dangerous thing that could happen for the global world order. So, three things culminated at this point: one, the sanctions; two, the discount. The most and the significant aspect of our foreign policy was preventing China becoming the sole supplier or beneficiary of Russia. So we needed that buffer to be created, and India had to step in. Though there is an aspect of self interest in it, but we were also looking at the overall scenario, which would be catastrophic for the region, which would be catastrophic for the global order, because the fallout of the current closeness between Russia and China is being felt by the world. Maybe not completely, maybe people don't understand the extent of it, but in scenarios and in areas where it has to be felt, it is being felt. So we had no other choice. I'm not defending India's decision, I'm explaining India's decision, because I don't think we need any defense for doing something that we feel and we know that is right, and I completely stand by it. So we stepped in, we took advantage of it. We also tried to continue that wedge that we were trying to have in between China and Russia. Though it is successful or failure, time will tell. But as of now, the pressure on Russia is slowly being taken away by us. Thanks to that, some other countries joined in, and the things are the way right now. That is the main reason that we had to import oil from Russia. Remember, this is middle of 2023. Our oil import percentage from Russia has gone down drastically. Yes, it rose to 33%. It is monthly, it is coming down significantly. So, as the time goes on, as the supply chains free up, remember, this is the Indian perspective. This is what was happening from Indian point of view. To add to the chaos, globally something entirely different is being different was and is and continues to happen. One, let's talk about the Western role here. Majority of the outlets that started accusing India of funding Putin's war in Russia, these countries still continue to import large percentage of Russian oil into their territory. Even a foreign affairs minister, Mr. Jaishankar, said what European Union imports in half a day, India imports that total amount in 1 month. I don't know how else to say it. Sheer hypocrisy from the West, how microscopic they look at things. As long as the microscope lens fits their narrative, Russian gas was still heating the homes in European Union. The Nord Stream fiasco was a whole different thing that happened at that time. But Russian gas inflows were constant during all this time into European Union. How they screwed themselves up, that is another whole hour to discuss. But the quantity was reducing slowly, albeit very slowly, but they were still importing oil from Russia. They continue to import Russian oil into their territory. So, since they realized that these accusations that India was funding Russian war in Ukraine, rather politically put by, I think, I don't know which outlet put it, India funds Putin's war, they started shifting to the narrative that India became laundromat of Russian oil. It's as if they forgot that there is a third country, Middle Kingdom, called China, and India was the only operator in that region. It's as if India is the smoothest operator of all those things. So what India was essentially doing was India was buying the cheap oil, very naughty of it. I'm a little bit proud of it also. I don't know whether it is right or wrong, but I have to give it have to give kudos to the business acumen. I don't know how this is going to end up, but I'm a little bit proud of their naughtiness. So what India was essentially doing was India was buying oil from Russia at discounted price, crude oil to be very specific, and we were refining it in our refineries. See, India exports 85% of its energy needs from outside world, but what it imports essentially is crude oil. We don't import refined products. We import crude oil. We have huge refineries. We have the largest in the world. Um, we have the best infrastructure in terms of oil refinery in the world, and we refine that oil and we sell it to ourselves, and then we export it. We don't import refined products. We import crude, we refine it, then we use it, and we sell the rest. So what India was doing was, or rather smooth operators in India were doing, were they were importing Russian crude, they were refining it, and they were selling it back to the West. On the okay, so this shenanigans went for some time. Later on, as I said, the Russian oil supply dwindled. Then things were back to normal. So who were the beneficiaries here? The laundromat accusation doesn't stand a chance, because if India didn't step in, if India didn't refine that product and send it back to those countries, these countries that were grappling with their energy securities would have collapsed. or rather their inflation would have been much higher than what it was, or what it was. So India took a gamble there, and India, yeah, essentially we were trying to help in whichever ways we can. However you term it, there is no other word for it, but India had to take a gamble, and India tried to help in a situation where no other country was willing to, or rather no other country was in a position to. Do you think it was in the best interest of China to supply these struggling European Union countries? No. China would have happily sat on the sideline and saw these countries collapse, then step in and do what they do usually, like how they are doing it in African countries. So the accusation also doesn't stand a chance. I think it's an reflex when it comes to India. Let's throw the mud first. If it sticks, it sticks. If it doesn't, we'll stay silent and we'll throw another ball of mud towards India. So the whole point of making this video is it has been sitting in my mind since 2021, because I think I knew what was happening. I think we all knew what was going to happen. But what these guys did not expect was the the impact of sanctions on themselves. As I said, when it comes to conflict, the knee jerk reaction from the West is to impose sanctions. As I said, nobody cares about the outcome of what those sanctions are. They don't even care whether these sanctions work or not. They don't even care whether whom these sanctions end up hurting. I think this is one case where it backfired big on them. Who suffered at the end of the day? The people of those countries suffered because of high energy bills, high food bills, unable to pay for the gas, unable to pay for food. The governments left no other choice to but increase the electricity bill, increase the gas bill. People were being forced to switch off their heating, their cooling. If you look at the micros of the struggle that people went in certain countries in Europe, it would be heart wrenching, to be pretty honest. Look at Germany, and the biggest of all, when their entire energy supply chain is being upended by Russia Ukraine war, some smart people thought it would be the best idea to switch off their nuclear plants. I'm not going to say which country did it, but kudos to them. They did it and screwed up their entire generation of coming up generation without a proper energy security. Some people would have thought common sense would have prevailed and they would have kept their nuclear energy at least to fill their electricity needs. But no, we have to be this, and we append our let us append our own. There was no interference from any other part except their own doing, and they appended their entire nuclear industry there. I don't think which is going to recover anytime soon, until unless somebody else steps in and says no, this is wrong, we are going nuclear way, which I believe to be the right way. Yes, there are some apprehensions about nuclear energy, but these apprehensions can be addressed. It's not as if we don't know how nuclear energy operates, what are the risks of operating nuclear energy. We know, we completely know. We also know the mitigation strategies of those things. So, on one hand, your oil supply chain is being, your energy security on oil side and the natural gas side is being screwed. Let us throw a wrench on ourselves in terms of electric security and electricity also. So by shutting down nuclear plants, we did that. Thankfully, in some countries, common sense prevailed, but unlucky for the people of those countries, in other countries, anti-common sense prevailed, I guess. So there we are. India played its role. We are happy that we played our role properly. Is this the right way or the wrong way? I don't know. I'm not going to judge, because at the end of the day, my people matter. And I think the government did the right thing here. Not only me, many other people believe that the government of India did what it did, and it did, and we absolutely stand by it. And if you cannot stand by it, I'm sorry that you feel that way. Will India do the same thing if it happens again? If the situation is like this, I hopefully India will do it again. It might sound crude, it might sound very unempathetic, but the matter of the fact is, a country, a struggling country, a developing country, a yet to develop country, which with a large percentage of population that is just coming out of poverty, that has a good amount of population still in poverty, that has n number of challenges in front of it, where people have trouble, to be pretty honest, in accessing food despite government interventions, which I might add is being done in a huge scale. Yet we have those issues, we have basic issues that we need to address. And now we are saying, on top of all these things, we are also going to push the energy insecurity aspect of it on you and your population, which is already struggling. The only gripe that I have in this entire thing, to be pretty honest, is I don't know whether the economics of it work or not. If you know the economics of it, please correct me. I'll try to correct my stance on it. But only thing that I have in this entire saga is, when India was purchasing oil at discounted rates from Russia, it could have passed, or the government could have passed some of those benefits to the consumer, which did not happen. The price of oil remained, given how the global situation played out, thankfully constant, more or less constant. But wa- was there a scope for the oil prices to grow down? In my opinion, there were plenty of opportunities for the oil prices to go down. Remember, in this time, when we are at a place where Western countries have stopped importing Russian oil, the amount of oil and natural gas that European Union imports from Russia has fallen to the lowest it has ever been. Recently, Saudi Arabia and Russia, one of the biggest contributors of OPEC, came together and said, we are going to cut our oil production. Now, you cannot import Russian oil. The oil that you were importing from Saudi Arabia, now Saudi Arabia says we are going to cut our production. Now, who is going to bear that brunt? So, it's a very complicated issue. What I'm trying to say is, this is a very complicated issue. There are a lot of nuances to it. There is no straitjacket answer that can be given, that can be accepted. The world community would have come together and said, first let us have a ceasefire, stop the death and annihilation that has been happening in Ukraine, and let us discuss the way forward. Apparently I was wrong, because it went the opposite way. Look at few cities that had happened. I'm not going to talk about it because I'm not that good at those things, so I'm not an expert in it. But I'm not an expert in this either, but I think I have a good understanding of how things work in this regard. And here we are. First, the accusations were wrong. India is not responsible for what is happening in Ukraine. It would be a good thing if both countries settle their outstanding issues and the death and destruction would stop. No, India purchasing of Russian oil did not help Putin's war or fund Putin's war. Rather, European Union's purchasing of Russian oil in a major fact contributed to Putin's war, because the total bill for Russian oil was through 430 billion and 200 billion was from European Union. For 3 or 4 months, India was the top importer of Russian oil. Just that, but the past 15 years, nobody saw how much India was importing. I think India's 3 months or 6 months or 1 year total Russian oil import will not even scratch 1% of the total oil that was imported by Western countries in the last 5 years. So there are numbers. It's not like everybody is blind or it is being entirely done in the dark. Who do you think is actually insuring the tankers that are bringing crude oil from Russia to India? Most of them are European countries. The flags that these ships have are European countries. Their headquarters are registered in European countries. Though they have a different countries flags on them, they are either being insured or owned by European countries, or companies that are operating out of European Union. Where do you think the money is going? Where do you think the money is being funneled through? It's when you don't look at the micro when it matters, you get these dumb headlines that are being thrown against India. I think few years down the lane, when this thing hopefully gets settled, because everybody agrees that it is at a stalemate right now, and nothing is. It's at stalemate. It is going to be a long war, whether we like it or not. Whenever this thing hopefully soon gets settled, when everything is on the table, I think things will become clear. It's not as if this is fog of war, because that fog of war gone long back. It's been 2 years, more than 1.5 years since. If you count the 2014, it has been more than 4 years that this has been on the brink. So, do I support India stance in this regard? Yeah, not only me, many of us do support India stance in this regard. Or hell, even India stand in Russia Ukraine war. Will this continue? Absolutely. These articles are going to come. There is no other way about it. These articles are going to continue, particularly given the success of how G20 and the declaration that came out of it. I see an increase in such attacks, but where it matters, I don't think it matters. So, hope this podcast has been helpful. Hope you liked it. So, thank you. Bye bye.